Well, I don't have much money, and I don't have much time, and I don't have many friends I could call mine. And I've been deceived, yeah, but haven't we all? I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. Well, I don't know why, and I don't know where, and I don't even know how, and I no longer care. But I've seen your face, and I've heard your call. Yes, I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. Let it go.
Hi, and welcome to another SDA Q&A. I'm your host for today, Peter Dixon, and my very special guest is Genna Levitch. How are you, Genna?
Hi, Pete. I'm well, thanks. How are you?
It's great to have you on the program today. Excuse me. We will be talking about that special era that kind of started late 60s into the 70s and even tapered out a little bit in the early 80s. That's kind of when I came along and discovered you guys around 79 and then got into bands and played a lot of the songs from this album, actually, which I will hold up. All My Friends Are Sinners. Awesome. We'll come to that in a minute. And so we're going to be talking about that era of time, particularly as it kind of flourished in Australia in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, there's a movie that's just come out, I think, called The Jesus Revolution, which looks about the ground zero where this kind of revolution first sprang up in California, I believe. And I haven't seen the movie, but I'm told it's really good. Be interested to see what you think if you get a chance to watch it.
Sure.
But that wave of gospel revival in hippie Jesus and the Jesus freak movement found its way to the shores of Australia and New Zealand, and found its way into the hearts of many young Adventists at the time too. So you were very much involved in that era. You knew and met Lowell Tarling and Bob Wolfgram, and you guys formed a little record label, and this is a book about that. I love what you've called there, the story of a small gospel record label with a good idea.
Good idea,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we're going to kind of talk a lot about that era, your involvement with Galilee and the albums. I've got this one too. Refugee, Bob Wolfgram. That's awesome. And also, yes, that Persecution Games, that was, wasn't it?
Yeah. Look, I actually was hoping that you might be able to play some of the songs in the background while we're doing the interview. I don't know if you've got the capacity to do that.
I can try and do that. I think because they are actually online, I will get a copyright stab against me for using copyrighted material. In fact, the song I played at the beginning, just a quick little self plug here, is from this album. Standing at the Cross. And if you want to buy it, they can click the QR code, or if they go to Spotify, they can listen to that whole album and the song that was just playing at the intro. But the reason I mention that is that whenever I play my own song, because it's actually on a recording on iTunes, I even get a copyright claim against myself. So so I don't. The long answer is I don't think we can do it.
Look, look, maybe I could do it at my end because it's but I don't have my CD player, plugged in. But yeah, I understand. We all our songs are on iTunes as well.
Yeah,
I don't know if they're on Spotify, but they're on iTunes.
What I'll do is I'll make sure that in the link below, I'll add links to all the albums.
Sure.
That way people can come across them.
Sure.
And by the way, this is number 6 in a mini series I've been doing on these, this 70s SDA Jesus Revolution.
Yeah.
So we've been filtering them in through this whole season 5. Well, let's get started. Tell us, how did you first meet, Bob and Lowell? What was your involvement?
We were at school together. So Bob was a year below me, although we're the same age. I'd skipped a year in primary school, so I ended up a year ahead of him. And Lowell was 2 years ahead of me at school. So I went through high school with Lowell and got to know him very well because we're at school together for 3 or 4 years. At least, and Robert was at high school, and I knew him, but he wasn't really a musician even in those days. He was boarding with Dave Caldwell, who was the deputy head, who had a house next to the school at Strathfield Adventist High School, and he, as Bob has said in previous interview with you, he was in a school band. He played the E flat bass, and his musicality didn't start to blossom until he was in. He went down and boarded at Lilydale at Warburton at the high school down there, and that's where it sort of started. By the time I caught up with him again when he was at Avondale started his theology degree, he had blossomed into something that I really didn't recognise. He'd really grown into quite a different person with a lot of self-confidence. He's obviously very intelligent, and his talent was starting to show with music as well. But going back a step to the high school years, I finished high school in '69, and the hippie sort of revolution was 66 to 68, 69, those years. So I was fascinated by hippiedom, mostly the freedom that it had. I wasn't really involved with it, but we'd read all about it. I was at school, I was studying. I was too young to be involved in it, but I wish I was. By the time I finished high school in '69, then I did a year at Avondale College, 1970. My mother was very keen that I become a minister, but I already at that stage was cautious about the idea, and so I only spent a year at Avondale and then went to university and did dentistry. I was a bit fascinated at that point because the Jesus Revolution started in '69. It was on the front cover of Time magazine, and I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity for me to possibly do something with the Adventist Church. I was starting to lose my confidence that the church had the ability to be relevant to me, but I thought maybe I could be an agent of change, a part of an agent of change, by being involved in that. And Brian Craig had started he was a youth minister for the Greater Sydney Conference at the time, and he started a thing called SALT, Share a Little Truth, it stood for. And it was different to the Melbourne Street Preachers that Bob was part of, because they were sort of like an organic group that didn't really have a leader, while SALT was the brainchild of fairly forward-thinking member of the church administration.
Yes.
So there was a difference there. I think that the Melbourne group had a lot more, they had a lot more cutting-edge theology, whereas we had a lot of enthusiasm. And it lasted for a few years. We used to preach a lot down the Domain, so we'd go down there and we'd, there was a public speakers platform. We'd preach there, and I really thought that we were doing something quite incredible, because the church really hadn't had that sort of outreach program. It had, missions that we were involved in, where ministers would run the mission on the on the prophecies and the the statue that had feet of clay and the body of bronze and all that, which had been around for nearly 100 years. And I remember asking one of the ministers, why they kept doing it. They said, well, it kind of works. That the tent mission, it works, and we keep doing it. So we were doing stuff, basically on the streets, and we had a lot of people that were very interested, a lot of people that actually came to church, and that's where it all fell apart, because they came to church in jeans and thongs. Mm-hmm. And the Adventists said, can they please dress properly before they arrive? And we sort of thought, hang on, there's a cultural difference here that I don't think we can bridge this cultural difference. That was already in 71, and around that time, Lowell had already finished his studies. He was an English teacher. He's teaching at Stratfield, and he wrote a play called Jonah, a musical play, and he asked me to be part of it, to be an actor in the play, and we put it on at Ryde Civic Centre, Newcastle, Avondale, and we also did it for the Anglican Church somewhere in the city. So, it was a good play. It was a good musical play. It was quite successful, but it was clear that we weren't going to get much of a toehold in the Adventist community. They were just too conservative, for us, and that probably carried on a few years later when, Lowell contacted me and said, look, Bob and I want to do an album. He's got this group of friends who are street preachers who are prepared to, commit their tithe money to it. So we've got a budget. If you can organise a recording studio and musos, we're going to do an album. Bob doesn't want to be the lead singer because that's not his gig. But Sally Hilda was a pupil of his from Stratfield who had a phenomenal voice, and she was going to do most of the singing, on the album. And that was the first one, All My Friends Are Sinners, that we did. So that was our. That was the socio-religious climate that you're talking about of the Jesus movement in the late 60s into the 70s. So hippies had kind of faded by the early 70s. The Vietnam War was finishing and all that. The heavy metal stuff hadn't started, but there was suddenly we'd gone from Deep Purple to Yummy Yummy Yummy, I Got Love in My Tummy.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a little window there, 66 to 76, but particularly 71 to 74, that just seemed to be quite a unique period. It's fascinating, and I agree with what you're saying there, that you were starting to feel the church wasn't relevant to you. But then when you did start getting on board with some exciting things that were happening, and then people came to Adventist churches, that kind of was a bad thing.
It was incredibly, disappointing that, we were relevant to people in our generation. And when we brought them to church, the other church members said, I don't think we want these type of people here. It was a socioeconomic thing. A lot of these people were off the street. A lot of them were just people that some of them were, backpackers, itinerant travelers. Some of them were locals. Some actually stayed with the church. Others, just found it all too difficult. And I found it very difficult at that point too. I was bitterly disappointed. I couldn't work out how the church was going to change to keep up with the times. And the answer is that I don't think it has changed.
No.
I don't think it has changed. It's a very conservative organisation that attracts people that are very conservative, and they're not asking for change.
No, and it's a sad thing because you mentioned who was it again that from the conference there or the division that helped you start?
Brian Craig.
Great guy.
Yeah, great guy.
And they did that film, didn't they? Was it Sunrise?
Let the Sun Shine In.
Let the Sun Shine In.
Yeah.
We did a chat to someone about and showed parts of the film. And I even just watching that back, the church kind of archived that for all this time. But I remember seeing such hope and excitement. And I would have been about 10 or so when that came out.
Yeah.
I didn't get to see it, but I got to see the different groups that were playing
Right.
back then, and everyone wearing flares at church, at college, and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I had this sense of real hope. And then as I became a teenager, and as we started hitting into the early '80s, and I stumbled across this album, '79, we continued to have this sense of hope. But what I've realized is that I then got into bands and, trying to emulate what you guys were doing,
Yeah.
and was offered this hope by the youth leaders, by the kind of people we were just talking about.
Right.
And that carrot held me there right up until like 7 years ago.
Right.
And now I've realized, wow, I gave a whole lifetime of, yeah, it's about to change. It's going to change any minute now. This beautiful, flourishing thing that Genner and Lowell and
Yeah.
Sally
Yeah.
and Bob
Yeah.
brought in is going to suddenly take off with all the young people. And yet you see little fires of it happening all the time,
Yes.
even
Yes.
now.
Yeah.
But you realize that as a big picture, they don't want you in there.
No, they don't.
It's
They
false,
don't.
false hope. And
Yeah.
it's a bit discouraging. But to kind of take a positive spin on it, what I'm
Yeah.
trying to do in this series is, in that time frame, there's a real gem of Adventism that shone. Des Ford was preaching righteousness by faith.
Yes. Yes.
This little gem in there that seems to also still be nestled within Adventism in some parts of it. Can you share with us your thoughts on this idea of this gem of the gospel that Adventists might have had, still potentially have, and your journey out of the church as well?
Look, I'll do my best. Peter. Obviously, I'd really like to answer your question, but some of it is hidden from me, even after a lifetime of reflection and reading, and and discussion with my friends who have also left the church, on how it affected us, and how do we move beyond it. I think that there does come a time when there's a conflagration occurs in the universe, where something comes together. Des Ford's theology was part of it. The Jesus movement was part of it. The whole sense of the '60s, in which we were hoping to create a generation that had greater freedom and greater sense of community and responsibility and social justice, were all part of the groundswell of the '60s. The Second World War was over. Our parents had come back. There was the baby boom generation was happening. So there was lots and lots of us, and we were breaking new ground. It was something that happens. Maybe, I grew up with it, and I thought that change was going to continue to happen. But looking back, that '60s was a decade that maybe only happens once every couple of hundred years. Yes. Where change is just in the air, and everyone's just loving it, and everything seems to be bursting. And wherever you look, there's opportunity. There's opportunity. Whitlam got in. The Vietnam War was over. Education was free. I went to university. The first year I had to pay a mozza to survive. The second year Whitlam got in, and it was all free. Suddenly the world was going to be a very different place. Medicare started. Medibank started. Those Whitlam years were really very dramatic, and it was, I guess, the payoff from winning the war and becoming successful after the war. All those industries that had started as a result of it, there was enormous appetite for change, and it was a very exciting time to live in. I think that by the time I got to end of high school, and I was, my story is a little bit complicated because my parents were immigrants. My grandfather had become a Seventh-day Adventist and had left home in St. Petersburg. They were Russian, and had travelled across Russia and ended up in Vladivostok, which is on the Pacific coast. Moved in with an Adventist family, married their younger daughter, did a theology course in China by someone from the division, came out and ran a theology course for Russian speakers, because there was a lot of Russian speakers who had left Russia during the revolution because they weren't communists and were living in Manchuria, which is on the border between China and Siberia. And he was there in the early '30s. So I had that background of being a third generation Adventist, and it was Adventism that had basically saved my family in China, because it was a lawless time, and it was a very wild time. You know, the opium was available. The mum said most of the girls became prostitutes. The boys became, you know, opium addicts. They survived because, you know, Adventism kept them together and kept them safe, kept them on the straight and narrow. So there's a lot of pressure in my family to respect the benefits of Adventism and what it had given us as a family. There was a lot of pressure. Immigrant family and an Adventist family, you know, as well. But I think the big thing of the 60s that changed that, it said Australia is a place where you can find your own way if you've got the wherewithal and the courage to do it. And there was a couple of my friends who were in the same sort of situation that went, look, you know, this pathway that we've started on in the 60s, which, you know, went through the Jesus movement, and yes, nothing happened with the Adventist Church, but we've still got the opportunity to explore our lives and live our lives independently. And it was a difficult thing to do, because you've got to go back to first principles to work out, you know, what are your morals, what are your ethics, what, you know, how do you want to live your life, how do you want to spend your time, you know, how do you want to bring up your children, and what schools do you want to send them to? You know, those questions, once you need answers to all those things, because you're no longer part of the Adventist, you know, social mentality that says you do this on Saturday, you do this during the week, you send your kids there, you pay your tithe, you become part of the organisation. And I must say, it took a good 10 years to go through that process and leave, and that was done with a group of friends, one of whom, you know, died a few days ago. That was Jim Ward, who was a teacher at Strathfield.
I wanted to mention Jim in the program.
Jim,
in fact, look, let's spend a bit of time just quickly mentioning him and sharing a little bit of some memories. He was going to be on the show, actually. So
really, yeah. Okay.
It's very sad news. He and I were riding together recently.
He's he was a very intelligent man, who was also, Bob Wolfram described him as a restless pilgrim. And I thought he was a lovely description, because he was always searching. He had a very spiritual part to him. You know, he was a poet, he was a writer, and he also, you know, carried a lot of damage, like a lot of us did from those years. They were difficult years to grow up in. And it made him a difficult and awkward man, a difficult and awkward friend at times, you know. But, you know, we managed to maintain a friendship during the course of our lives. You know, I've known him since I was 17, when I was in my last year of high school, and he was a teacher at Strathfield. And somehow we struck up a friendship and it continued more than just being friends. We actually shared the journey of leaving Adventism and what it meant and how to do it. Towards the end of his life, he went back to being a fairly devout Christian, but not back to Adventism. He said, you know, Christianity is all about love.
Yeah.
Well,
we wish his family well, and condolence to friends and family.
Thank you.
That era. Just two quick things. The era of this kind of, the world was an exciting place, and that this may have been a rare one in a century or even 2 centuries kind of global experience. What years would you define as that, kind of the embers of it starting, and where you felt that it was starting to disappear, this dream? And then secondly, can you share with us when you started this journey out, and this 10-year period you spoke of where you were leaving?
Look, I think that the 60s probably started in 62 with the Beatles, you know, with their music. The music was fundamental to the change. That's why, you know, our albums were so important, because music is what it was a language of the changes that were occurring. If you follow, you know, from, you know, the high school, you know, rock and roll things that, you know, were in the early 60s, the Motown things, and they gradually developed where people were listening to the albums to seeing what changes were happening and what was happening in there. To put it really simply, you know, the Beatles, you know, taught us how to dance, and Dylan taught us how to think.
Yeah, I like that.
You know, so and the Beatles had the amazing emotional journey too. What they went through in the years that they recorded between the early '60s and '69 when they did their last album. You know, there was a phenomenal intellectual journey which they did, but nothing compared with what Dylan was doing. You know, he challenged a lot of the social mores. He challenged war. He challenged the industrial military complex. He challenged injustice, racism. You know, those were the things that, we thought that we could change because, we could talk about them, sing about them, and discuss them. And there were topics that, were, I guess they weren't forbidden, but they were topics that hadn't been addressed. And maybe we're seeing the very end of it at today, where people are talking about transgender, and, anyone who's in a minority group feels they need a voice. And that started right back then when, half the population, like women, didn't have a voice. And the feminist movement started, and I used to have a little tag that I used to wear, a sticker that I'd found somewhere that said "Better dead than wed," that the feminists used to
What did it say? Sorry, better
dead than wed.
Oh, right.
It was a feminist sticker. I remember my girlfriend at the time was horrified that I was wearing that sticker.
So if we looked at that, and there's two time frames I want to look at. So this kind of this revival of this sense of hope, you're saying, started around 62.
Yeah.
In some ways it kind of went right up to 1982, where at the tail end of it kind of happened. Where do you see that real golden era? And I guess I'm still referring to culturally, this kind of sense of excitement, not necessarily the gospel, just this very unique baby boomer era.
Look, it was tied to, I think, to the economy as well. The 60s were, incredible growth period. We had a recession in the early 70s, 72, 73. It hit after Whitlam sort of got elected, and I think that slowed things down, because to have boundless enthusiasm, you need to have money happening pretty easy as well.
Yeah, that's
and once we had that, remember, we had that recession and inflation, and then by the early 80s, we had the interest rates had gone up to 18%. I sort of was in business then, and they were really difficult times. Financially, it was difficult, and that puts a severe clamp on your enthusiasm and your ability to explore new lifestyles.
Yes, yeah, very true. Now I'm just going to bring a couple of messages up that are relevant to what we're talking about, and then I want to talk about that 10-year period that you began to leave as well.
Sure.
Bob Wolfgram is watching. Hi, Bob. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for the music. I love these albums, and it's the third in the trilogy, the Persecution Games. I don't have my copy. And so Bob has written, "Thank you for bringing Jim into the picture, old friend. Jim would have made a fascinating guest too. Peter, may he rest in peace." And also Dave Wilmoth is watching. How are you, Dave? Good to have you here. And Dave has just written, "Thanks for mentioning Jim. Love the guy." So yeah, that's I appreciate that, and it's I'm glad you guys are watching. So yeah, let's just kind of we've talked about how the gospel movement kind of really kicked off in the States, late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah,
had its impact here, and we're going to delve into that a little bit more as well, and its effect on Adventism. But I'm just interested in your leaving story. Tell us a little bit about the seeds of that starting, and give me some dates. I'm interested in that kind of journey, because it's never a moment, is it? It can be a
no. Although there was by the time I got to the end of high school, and I was school captain at Strathfield High School, I had doubts that I could ever become a fully fledged member of the ministry. I couldn't really put my finger on it in those days, but it's something to do with level of authority over my life and my wanting to have some sovereignty over my life. It was the issue of sovereignty. I somehow was, felt that we were constricted in ways that just, I was prepared to except because I wanted to assimilate into Australian society as a child of immigrants. So, I played by all the rules, and, I understood what needed to be done, and I was good at it in high school. But by the time I finished high school, I thought, look, I think I'm on my way to being accepted into Australian society, but I want to explore what options I've got in this society rather than living a stock standard sociotypical life.
Wow.
So that there was also a journey from being an immigrant child, part of an alternative culture. Like, I didn't speak any English till I went to primary school, and although Russian isn't my strongest language because I stopped speaking it, a lot by the time I got to my teenage years. I'm still fluent in Russian. I can read and write. I did it in high school. So, it's English is my second language, but it's the one that I'm best at. When I go to Russia, after about a week or two, I start dreaming in Russian, and I don't have to translate into English what I'm about to say. Which is what happens. So there was also that journey as well for me that, that strict, Russian Adventist background that I came from was the soil that I sprang from.
Yes,
it was my background. So most of my cousins, and I'm one of 14 cousins from a large family, have stayed, in the church. Their children may not have, but they have, and they're church members. One of my cousins has a very important position in the church. Actually, he's good mates with Ted Wilson, and they holiday together and they do things together. Ted Wilson's been to our place for a meal with my cousin Peter Kulik. He's
Peter Kulik's your cousin.
Yeah, he's my cousin. So yeah. Oh. And so's Kevin Maevsky, if you know him.
Yes, Kevin well.
Yeah. So my mother was the second of 5. So, Nadja Kulik was the oldest. Then my mother was the second. Then it was the Rodanovs, and then the Leesers, and then finally the Maevskys.
Wow.
Yeah,
it's a little extra piece to the puzzle there.
large family. So. I left Avondale, went to uni, loved the freedom of university. In second year uni, I started. I asked Anne out for after church we went to. Would you believe I took her to the Rotalactor at Liverpool?
What's that?
The Rotalactor. They used to have a milking machine in which cows walked in at one side and went around in a circle. They walked out the other end after they'd finished milking, and it was called the Rotalactor. So we went out one Saturday afternoon, and the next weekend I said to her, look, I'd like to take you out again, but I've been thinking of leaving the church. And she said, me too.
Wow.
She said, me too. And that was the last time we went to church. So it was on the very last day that I actually went to church regularly. I met Anne, and we both left the following week.
That's a fascinating story. Wow. And Anne's in the background. Hi, Anne. Nice to have
She's just walked out, but she had a
meeting. The vicinity.
She's in the vicinity. Yeah, she had a meeting to go to.
Something you've touched on there, I want to just talk a little bit about.
Yeah.
Sovereignty, finding your own sovereignty.
Yeah.
I love that. And if I think about the Adventist Church, and I mentioned leaving, my leaving but staying so long, the opposite of you, when I had the idea of, hang on, this doesn't seem to be adding up, in the early 80s and the post-Glacier View, and there were enough youth kind of leaders that were almost sent into the system to really try and keep all the young people. So that early 80s, there was speaker after speaker at camps and all this sort of stuff that were really encouraging us to stay. And, they were trying to offer a little bit of hope and this kind of thing. So when I say it was false hope, I haven't come to this part of my life and look back and go, oh, what a waste. I don't think that. But this idea of sovereignty, I want to talk a little bit about that, because it's only since leaving that I've really started to go, you know what, I want to be my own person. This sense of my own realm, not to be selfish, but just to have a sense of maturity about my outlook on life.
Yes.
And I'm very impressed with you guys that kind of face this kind of stuff. Some stayed, some didn't, but there's a thread through all of this kind of early 70s gospelers. There's a maturity with you guys that kind of bypassed me, at least, and perhaps many in my generation. And I really respect that, but I see it as something the Adventist Church particularly likes to suppress in its men. They suppress women in certain ways
Yeah,
with
yeah,
not getting leadership roles,
yes,
but they suppress men in this way of taking away, and it's just hit me with what you've just said, by
yes.
taking away their
The
sovereignty.
sovereignty, and your sovereignty is, the word sovereign is obviously from kingship, and you should be allowed, you know, particularly in Australia where we've got so much freedom, social freedom, is to find out who you are and be the king of your own self.
Yeah.
You find out what your strengths, what your weaknesses are, and I think that it probably is more strongly exhibited in a creative person than elsewhere, because your creativity, you know, is a wellspring that you can't suppress.
Yes, but I think what I found for me, and by the way, we're not talking about a patriarchy or a hierarchy or dominating other people. This is a self journey. This is finding out the maturity within yourself,
Yes, yourself, yeah.
making your decisions, supporting your family, and working for equality. They're the important things.
Yeah.
But I found the church kind of takes the creativity and takes a creative male and just gives them just enough, but does not allow them to fully expand. So I noticed all these thoughts and themes,
Sure, yeah.
but I never fully started to mature until the
Yeah.
last 7 years, and
Yeah.
I'm finding that journey easier and easier. The
Yes.
first 2 or 3 years leaving was very difficult, and I think, and you really hit something there that I'll be pondering a lot more about. But what, because you probably left and took control of your life, you and Anne, like,
Yeah.
she's been thinking about it too, and you leave. That's it. You probably faced some of those growing up feelings a little quicker. But would you agree with my assessment that maybe the church tries to stifle that kind of, follow your own path mentality? And
Look, I think that I've had it articulated very clearly by some ministers who said, look, if you go and do your own thing, you'll end up leaving the church. If you go to university and become a free thinker, you'll leave the church. If you become an individualist, you'll leave the church. If you step outside these very, very clear confines that we have, there's a risk that you'll leave the church, because you'll be, they call it a temptation. And I'm saying, well, it's not a temptation. I can't live your restricted lifestyle. It's just, it seems to be against everything that, is available out there in the world. There's life, there's food, there's pleasure, there's music, there's entertainment, there's relationships, there's food and wine, which I enjoy, and yet the Adventist doctrine basically says these are the things that you're not allowed to do. You can't dance, you can't drink, you can't smoke, you can't this, you can't that. So we've got this whole list of negatives that define you as an Adventist, rather than what is it that you're doing with your life. And that restriction on living your life, but just sitting at home, making sure you don't make a sin, to me is just anti the joy of life and the fullness of life that's out there. That's probably my biggest difference with Adventism is I don't want to live that restricted lifestyle. And yet most of my friends are still Adventists, and they don't see that it's a restricted lifestyle. They enjoy the confines. It gives them barriers that give them comfort, and it's obviously important to them for that. Possibly for that reason.
And I hasten to add, I'm not saying that people that have, from this era we're talking about, that have stayed, I'm not saying that they haven't matured and aren't sovereign beings. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not, like, for example, Bob Wolfgram is an Adventist, and I really respect, because he is his own person. He is mature. He's his own. He's on his own path, but he's been able to incorporate Adventism into his life in a way that is done quite maturely. And I guess I'm speaking more to a lot of the people that kind of stay just blindly and follow like sheep, and they seem to be encouraged to stay that way.
Yes. There is that unspoken pressure. What I might add to the mix is that I had a very my mother died a couple of years ago, and she was a very strong personality and wanted to dominate me completely. Like breaking away from her was something that I did in my late teens. Going to Avondale was part of it. As soon as I got to university and university was free, I left home. She was very, very, very. She had plans for what she wanted me to do because she hadn't had a chance to do them herself, and that's improper. you're not allowed to live your life through your kids. You've got to let them live their own lives.
Yeah.
And so me throwing off my mother's, apron strings was also included in throwing off the church's authority and God's authority behind that. Because my mother, had all this authority behind her, stood the church, behind the church stood God, and I just threw all the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
I just said I'm leaving home, I'm throwing that all away, and I'm not going to be part of that because you all want to control me. And it was only years later that I realised that that was maybe an overreaction. But I was happy enough at that point to sort of say, look, I'm living my life and I don't actually need to come back to Christianity. There's nothing that I'm feeling that I'm missing that I really need. And I was okay with that. And Bob felt differently because his journey was different. For him, Christianity is, he told me once was the one thing that had stayed constant in his life and was really important to him. And I said that on his behalf at one of the what do they call those Adventist things for creatives that they had? It's on the tip of my tongue. He won the Lifetime Award for creative work at what was the Adventist? What was the Avondale thing called where we did the concert, Peter?
Oh yes, wasn't Gabe Reno?
No, there was that event. They used to have a yearly event at Avondale for creative types. It was called. It'll come to me anyway.
Yeah, me too. I've got a mental thing.
Manifest.
Manifest. That's right.
Manifest. So at one point, Bob won the Lifetime Award for creativity, and he well deserved it. But unfortunately, he was in Fiji at the time, and a cyclone hit, and he couldn't get back to accept it. So he asked me to do it on his behalf, and so. I said to him, "What do you want me to say about your spiritual life? Because I can talk about your academic career, but I don't know too much about where you are spiritually." And that's one of the things that he said, that it's been a constant in his life, and it has. That he's applied himself, brilliantly to understanding the Bible and the gospel. He's helped translate it from English to Fijian with a group in Fiji with a businessman that supported it, and he's also done a parallel Fijian Bible, and he's an incredibly deep scholar.
Yes,
in that and many other areas, and why it was that people like myself and Bob and Lowell, sprang out of that space where we challenged, the church and society and a lot of the norms and cut our own path. I'm not really sure how that all came about, but that's a space that you're exploring, because you're saying it's a very unusual space, it's a very powerful space. It's set a precedent for following generations. Tell us about it while you're still here. And I really respect you for doing that, Peter. I think that it's significant.
Well, I think it's something that I hope lives on, because what I'm discovering, a lot of the people that have grasped this Adventist gospel that we're saying was kind of birthing in the late 60s, early 70s, they're getting older, they're retiring, they're speaking up a little bit now about it in support, but some of them run their own little Bible study groups and Sabbath school groups.
Sure.
And I say to them, why don't you make this available? And they're even still a bit too scared to kind of put it out there. So I'm feeling like this might be another way of at least kind of getting their message out there.
Sure.
Because there is something unique about the Adventist gospeler, the Adventist gospel person. They love the Sabbath, but not as a salvation kind of measure.
Yeah.
They enjoy the subculture of Adventism, the networking of it. Often they're quite thoughtful how they approach theology. They like the teachings of Jesus. They love the camaraderie. They also have a similar a healthy perspective of Ellen White, if that's possible. And they're not. A lot of them don't believe anything happened in heaven in 1844 of a supernatural nature, but providentially they came together. So in this mini series, I am trying to tease out what I've been calling this gem of the Adventist gospel, and I'm hoping by the time I come to the end of it, there'll be some key points that I can kind of go. Here's this little group. You guys still hang out. Maybe make it a bit more obvious to others so they can also kind of, run with the baton once you guys have left the coil.
Yeah, Peter, that's very valuable what you've said, and I agree with with a lot of it. I think that maybe the reason why I'm thinking some of the groups stay below radar is because they copped a shellacking 20, 30 years ago, and they're sort of saying, look, why should I stick my head up? I'll live my life with my friends, that we can explore areas that interest us, but why should we attract the attention?
Exactly.
My sister was a member of a home church and still is for many years, and it was partly her way of dealing with with the I guess the strictness of the Adventist church is doing a church group and exploring the gospel, particularly the justification by faith aspect of it. Over the decades, she's explored Pentecostalism as well, and I think that's something that Adventists are reluctant to explore because they are actually emotionally very tied back. They're told not to respond to your emotions, be logical, explore the Bible, line up all the verses so that you've got your doctrines correct. It's all very forensic.
Yes.
And other churches are very emotional, their approach, and Pentecostals particularly emotional. I remember we had some friends who were Russian Orthodox, and they sort of said, the beauty of Russian Orthodox is that the singing is so powerful and the chants are incredible. And, I said, what about the doctrines? They said, who cares about the doctrines? It was like fantastic entertainment. It touched your soul, and religion has to do that. Sitting in a group and discussing the Bible and being intellectual is great for academics, but there's got to be more than that. And our music had more than that. Our music had a lot of emotion to it. And that's what, opened that door, I think, to creativity and actually feeling the gospel. It's what I said at Manifest, is that if you do want to be a Christian, you can't do it through doctrine, you can't do it through through reading, you can't even do it through going to church. You've got to open your heart and feel it, because that's where spirituality is. And music and creativity, art, is one way of your heart opening and making you vulnerable and open to your own emotions and your own feelings.
100%. And that was such an important part of my own life and an important part of that movement that we're talking about, the music, the worship, the opening yourself to feelings.
Yes.
And these guys that are a bit too scared to speak up or make it that public, that's okay, because I feel like there's people like yourself and myself that are willing to champion this little thing and to at least make it available out there, but to include that worship music, as in the energetic connection people have with music is so powerful. Again, I'm giving this lots of plugs, and I hope people go and buy it wherever you can. I think you guys have got a website they can get it.
We do.
When I first put this album on, and I'd been getting into some really great Christian bands in the late 70s, early 80s, like the Res Band and some of these really great rock bands, Larry Norman and Chuck Girard, Tom Howard and stuff.
Yes.
I'd never heard Adventists do it. And so I remember just putting this album on and going, wow, this is so good.
Whoa, yeah. At last.
Yeah.
At last.
We'll segue now into this perfectly, the Galilee story.
Yeah.
But I just want to, we're just talking about this gem of gospel Adventists that, and many of them find a lot of solace in the teachings of Des Ford. And just a quick plug for Gillian. She's just released the 5th volume of this incredible series that pulls together letters, articles, people's comments and thoughts on that whole era. I think, leading up to Glacier View and a little bit beyond it. I'm going to be chatting to her about all 5 volumes soon. So they do, this group of gospelers, Adventist gospelers, who enjoy infusing the Des Ford message in there.
Yeah.
And one last thing I'll say on that, John Rosier, I'm not sure if you've heard of John. I've interviewed him a few times.
Yeah.
He is an incredible scholar, I'd say, and philosopher, but quite a loyal Adventist, but in the loyalty of this kind of Adventist gospel we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And he's written an incredible article or statement of beliefs and I think it's called What Adventism Could Have Been. and I said, why don't we come on the program, we'll talk about what Adventism could have been and could be, and go through his points. So that'll come towards the end of the series, but I just wanted to throw that in there for those that are watching, listening, that'll be coming up. But let's both hold up our little books here, The Galilee Story.
Yeah.
Just quickly tell Where can people buy this?
Look, it's on. We do have a website, and you can buy it on the website. If you go to Galilee, just look up Galilee.com. There's a website, and you can buy it on there.
Yeah.
And you can buy that. I think I've handed it all back to Bob, but I think it's on. He's got it on Spotify or on iTunes as well.
Yeah.
You can get the book and the three and the three CDs.
Yeah.
And the three CDs as well. Mine are back the front when I look at my screen.
You've got to press the mirror button.
You've got to press the mirror button. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
it'll be somewhere in there.
Yeah.
But it is such a good read. It's filled with lyrics, stories. I've read it several times and highly recommend it. I love chapter 12, and I remember when all us young teenagers bought this album, we all fell in love with Sally, and so her chapter is called "Who is Sally Hilda?" So maybe a lot of people were trying to find out who she was, and she's written at the start of that, Lowell Tarling was an English teacher who had the good fortune of having me in his class.
Look,
let's talk about this era and this book.
So look, it was clear by the time we had finished the album that there's no way the church could understand the combination of rock and roll and the gospel.
Wow.
And that there's no way because Bob's words, Lowell's words, they're the creative side, obviously, that are very accurate theologically. Both Bob and Lowell are deep thinkers, and the time that they wrote, it was writing it to our generation in a fresh way, with contemporary music.
Yeah.
Incredibly powerful, and very well done. I remember taking the Sally's album when we finished it to Mum and saying, look, I want you to read the words while the songs are playing. And she couldn't absorb it. She couldn't absorb the theology because the music was just completely unacceptable. And I thought, well, I'm trying to impress her here that I've done something that's significant, but it's not happening.
And that's so sad. That's so sad. I did a similar thing with my mum on Black Sabbath album.
Black Sabbath album.
What's it called? The one.
Good try, Peter.
The one that's got Sweet Leaf on it. Anyway, she did it. She sat there and listened, and we read the lyrics. Good on you, Mum, if you're watching.
If you're watching. I remember going around with Lowell to his mum and dad's place doing the same thing, and his father sort of saying, oh, I hope this is okay. So what have you done here, Lowell? And okay, thanks for bringing it around. And his mother just sat and looked at it for a while and said, they won't like it. She was French. She has a very strong French accent. She said, they will not like it. And Lowell gave a big defense of the album and how good it was and how correct it was and how spiritually it was in the right place and theologically it was sound. And she just looked at him and said, they will not like it.
And you remember her saying that?
I remember those words, and I thought, look, if we can't get our parents across the line, what hope have we got with anybody else?
But isn't that sad? Because like here is a bunch of my generation that were listening to it and lapping it up for the first time hearing, have you heard the news? You have been set free.
Yeah.
And I'm going, I haven't heard that news.
Yes.
So it was very impactful on thousands of young Adventists.
And young Adventists, yeah.
Who then tried to emulate it and to live it. But we too were then, we realized pretty soon that it wasn't going to be an acceptable approach to use within the church. And you're saying that you realized that just having recorded the album.
It was clear that there was a select group that were going to love it, but the church in general was not going to ever acknowledge and support it. Yeah. And I think that's what part of our problem was. We knew that it was good quality. We knew it was excellent, quality music. And even now, I still listen to it because it's dated very well. You listen to it and you say, yeah, there's a couple of disco duck tracks, but it's just musically it's very sound. Theologically, it's still sound. It's still emotionally, it's still appealing.
Yeah,
You
you
know,
got a
and
lot of the Daly
I
Wilson
love it
big
for that
band in
reason.
there. You got
Yeah.
a lot of the Daly Wilson big band in there
There
somehow.
was. We managed to get some
Was
really good musicians in between tours, and you know
yeah,
that was correct. And you know, Mick Reed, who was a guitarist in the guy who did I'd Like to Have a Beer with my mate, the
yeah,
country and western singer.
yeah, Slim Dusty.
Slim Dusty. He toured with Slim Dusty for years and years. A beautiful musician, and you know, lovely guy. He became sort of lifelong friends with with Bob and Lowell as a result of
Well,
the album. They respected Bob's musicianship.
yeah, oh, of course. See,
Yeah.
Mark Menzies is a peer of mine, and his brother David Menzies is your generation.
Yeah.
And Mark and David put me onto the Daly Wilson Big Band well before I even heard this album. Did Dave Menzies have any influence on getting the Daly Wilson Big Band involved?
I
Was there
can't
a
remember how we made the connections, but
yeah,
I know that I booked the guys, and they helped Bob arrange some of the songs as well in the studio. You know, they
yeah,
said, "Is this what you want? Is this the sound you're looking for?" They were very capable in the studio. They were very experienced musicians. Peter, the thing I wanted to say was that I actually took the albums. Anne and I went and travelled to America for after I'd done a couple of years' work as part of the tour that we used to do in those days, and I took the albums to America to a bloke called Distribution by Dave, and Sally's album had already been had won the award for the best new artist in Australian Christian music. We had a guy in Sydney that was Christian music was just starting to be distributed, and we found a distributor who loved it. We sold 1,000 albums in the first 12 months. It was really very popular. But to build on that, we needed to have a base church that we sprang from, and because we couldn't do tours and concerts from the Adventist circles, it was really hard to start, say, with the Anglican Church or the Methodist Church, who didn't mind rock and roll, but they just didn't know who we were and where we were coming from.
Yeah.
And they sort of said, if you're that good, how come you're not performing in your own churches?
Yeah, exactly.
And that just made it really difficult. Plus, on top of that, Bob wasn't all that keen on being an upfront performer. That's why he got Sally to do the first album.
Yeah.
So without having a wellspring of your home church to support you, it's really hard to get going. And you know what I'm talking about.
100%. And the other denominations are a bit skeptical as well.
Yeah.
It took me a good 10 years of knocking on doors to the Baptists and the Anglicans and doing the odd gig here and there till finally I would say I started doing lots of gigs in the other denominations.
Right. It took you 10 years. Okay.
It took 10 years of just knocking on their doors and keep trying. And then, and with the Adventist church, they would have nothing to do with the rock music.
No.
So I would do country music and we'd have old time country music sing-alongs, and which I enjoyed. I loved it. Yeah. But I wanted Deep Purple, Status Quo, Black Sabbath, and they would not have our bar of it. So it was toe tap and country music, and eventually got to barn dancing, which we would do a bit of rock and roll at the end, which I used to love doing until we got banned from Avondale College for doing that. But 30 years,
of course,
30 years in though.
30 years, yeah.
Every year for 30 years, we did a barn night at college. Just bring up. Bob wrote a little answer to our question there. Charlie Hull arranged Sally and Refugee albums, was the point of contact with big band musos.
Yeah.
We toured with them. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And we mentioned David Menzies there. Did you? He's a genius musician. Did you have much to do with him, or was he more of a Kurumbong kind of connection? And didn't
Bob and Lowell might have had more contact with him. It wasn't me that had that much contact with him. Yeah. And let me say, sort of up front, that I feel a bit self-conscious in being interviewed on the Galilee story. I've got my own story, but the Galilee story is Bob and Lowell's creative child. I helped the production and helped it move forward and put things together, and loved their company and enjoyed having a project like this with them. It was significant to me, but it's I just need to say it's their creative work, not and I think part of our we had problems in the relationships at times because I am a project manager, and Bob said to me once, "You're a bit like a creeping glacier, Ganna. You try and take over everything." And I've learned to back off and be respectful of their space and their creativity.
Well, it's an interesting thing because anyone, like I see the three of you as kind of collaborative effort, each needing each other in a way retrospectively. At the time and during the process, you may not have always felt that, but looking back on it, you can see that the qualities and strengths that you each contributed were needed for it to actually become a part of history.
Yes, thank you, Peter. Yeah, thank you. My video seems to have frozen. Can you still see me okay?
I can see you okay.
What I am
going to do, though, someone's just written, "Oh, my goodness, you're live right now. I have so many questions. I can't believe this timing." Okay, Rodney, tell us more.
Tell us more. Peter, just to add to that, Peter, it seems that, I do have I do have a creative streak. I used to write poetry, and business is to me very creative because you're creating something that doesn't exist. Using a team of people and a concept and an idea that has to be commercially successful, and that's a particular skill as well that I have. But I seem to have spent most of my life working with or being close to creative people. Like, my wife's a designer and an artist, and living and working with creative people has got its own complexities. But if you can do that, you can deal with people who who've got talent and are very emotionally aware of where they are and what's happening. And then that's part of the. We Anne and I ran an architectural firm. We designed dental and medical centres, and we're to have interior designers and creative people and architects working for us, and part of the skill of working with Bob and Lowell and understanding how to deal with creatives, I carried on through the rest of my business and commercial life. Even now I'm doing real estate development, so I've got to coordinate a whole bunch of consultants and architects, and go through ideas and manage them to get the best out of them. And that's what you're referring to, is that often a collaboration between a producer and a director and a musician will produce something far greater than just the musician being on their own.
Yeah, and in fact, the word there will never be a time where there's no conflict and tension. Never. Hey, there is a little bit of a freezing thing going on.
Sure.
I'm just going to do a 2-minute timer and just reboot my Wi-Fi. So don't go away, everyone. We'll be right back. Great to have so many of you watching, and we'll pick up where we just left off in 2 minutes.
Carry me away, lift me from this place, ease my burdens, take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me away. My burdens, Lord, take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me away. Face, carry me away.
Sorry about that. Thanks for waiting, everybody. And yeah, I think we fixed that little problem there. It's funny. Are you still frozen?
I'm not frozen, but it's not what I'm currently doing. It seems to be playing something from a few minutes ago.
Oh, there just might be a delay on the going live, but I think we're fine here. I'll just get Adrian to just check for me and send me a message. Yeah, for some reason, this happens quite often. Modern technology, but I think we're at least going live and it's in sync to the audience, so that's all good. So thanks for your patience, everyone. I think we've got it back on track. Fascinating conversation. I'm really enjoying this, Skinner. And my special guest today, as I said, is Genna Levitch, and he was the producer there at Galilee Records, which was kind of the home base for the recordings and whatnot. And I think we were just talking a little bit about that, you know, the artist and the producer will often have conflicts, or always will have conflicts. I even ran my own label for, what was it, good 20 odd years, 20 plus years. And we had over 65 artists, and often 3 or 4 on the go at the same time. And I must say that I found it incredibly challenging, because I'm an artist, so to put producer hat on and artist hat on was very difficult. And but like you said, you learned a lot from doing that then kind of spilled over into your everyday life, and even currently what you're doing now has helped.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Peter? Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay?
I can hear you fine.
My what I'm seeing on the screen is not what I'm currently doing, but let's continue. If you can hear me, that's fine. Can you see me on your screen?
I can hear you and see you.
Okay.
It's all in sync.
It's all in sync. I'm just out of sync at this end. That's okay. Let's continue, Peter. There's something that you asked me early on about the 10 years of leaving Adventism. And I think what I'm referring to is it took me 10 years before I didn't feel guilty that I wasn't at church on Sabbath morning.
Yeah, interesting.
That was the you know, every Sabbath morning I'd wake up. I'm still calling it Sabbath, not Saturday, mind you.
Yeah.
You know, and because you're primed by your Adventist upbringing to know what to call yourself when you leave the church. You know, you're a backslider, you're a worldling, you've turned your back on the truth. You know, you've forgotten God. So there's all this self-judgment that's, you know, already primed up, ready to go the minute that you step outside of the church. And it took a long time to come to terms with that internal voice and the self-judgment that occurs as a result of it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've heard a lot of people say that.
Yeah.
And particularly your generation. I think there was a real last link was the Sabbath, and the guilt associated with not keeping it. We're just bringing up Bob Wolfgram has just written a little comment about what we're talking about. Distortion, Genna. Galilee would not have happened without you, my friend. You were everyone's go-to, our solver of matters we had no clue about.
Thank you, Bob.
And our new friend Rodney Full Circle has written. He was the one that wrote before, you know, oh my goodness, you guys are live right now. Has written, sadly, I'm a brand new former SDA. It has been hard emotionally. Hey, well, welcome to the program. SDA Q&A has a wide audience of former, current, and Adventists, from as conservative as your cousin Kevin, right through to the more liberal Adventists. So it's a very interesting melting pot. And Rodney, you might like to look in the description. You're watching from YouTube, and click the Facebook group where you can engage and meet a lot of these people at a more conversational level as well. So welcome to the group. And I think he's just written another. Appreciate that. Not sure where I belong now, but I trust in the Lord. So, yeah, well, look, good luck with finding your way there.
Look, I think that it is it's a very difficult personal journey to leave the church you were brought up in and decide that you're going to strike out on your own and find out what the world means to you and what you need to believe and how you need to believe it. It can be a lonely journey. I've been very lucky that I've had a group of friends that left about the same time that we, particularly in the early days, would compare notes about how we were travelling and mistakes that we were making. I mean, one of my very close friends, Rod Gibbs, we were living in Martinsville at the time, and after he left the church, he got really involved in the Illuminati, and it was one of the earliest conspiracy theories. And to his great credit, after a couple of months, he came around to me and he said, "You know what? I think that this is filling a hole that Adventism used to fill, because when you think about it, the great controversy and the fight between good and evil, it's a major, it's a galactic conspiracy theory."
Yeah.
And if you're not aware of yourself, after you leave the church, something has to fill the gap. And I've noticed that quite a few of my friends who've left the church recently have either gone to the extreme right or the extreme left.
Yeah.
They've either gone for the social gospel or they become Trumpians.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of surprised by that. But I think that the church fills a huge space in your heart and in your head, and you've got to be aware of that space and what else to fill it after you've left, and can be very lonely for a long time.
Yeah. Otherwise, all those other things become their new gospel. They still haven't found their sovereign path.
They haven't found their sovereignty. Yeah, haven't their sovereign path is I think a good word for it.
Yeah.
And I think that it's possibly easier to do when you're a creative type person, because you've got your own internal creativity which speaks to you and helps you to process those emotions and those feelings.
I've got a very strong and healthy inner world. I'm able to kind of not fantasy world, but just a strong inner sense of self and direction and who I am, and I enjoy my own time, and I think part of being a musician and a creative has helped with that.
Peter, can I ask you a question then?
Yes.
Peter, what role does this program play in your resolving the tensions, post-Adventist tensions for you?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and I'll just answer that. I'll just bring this up before I forget. Dave Wilmoth has written that self-judgment took me 40 years to get rid of the fear. What, that question you asked me, I often am asked, like, what are you doing? What are you doing this for? And honestly, I kind of have always been interested in this idea of what people believe, why they believe it, and can they defend it?
Right.
And my approach is coming from a former Adventist looking in from the outside. That's kind of the tagline of the program. Yeah. And I was a 5th generation Adventist. My great grandfather met Ellen White at a Brisbane camp meeting. I was fully marinated in Adventism and have had the same struggles that I can sense from you.
Yeah.
I didn't have any kind of people to share the leaving process so much with. So, in a long answer to your question, I guess in some ways I'm finding camaraderie in this show, but I'm also enjoying connection with, like, Kevin Maevsky, your cousin, mentioned. Good. I count him as a good friend, and we commune, but with polar opposites.
Yes.
Theologically.
Yes.
I'm guess in a nutshell, I'm interested in finding common ground with people.
Okay.
Not Adventists. I do. I've got several other podcasts that I run in all sorts of realms.
Yeah.
And I've just come from a weekend of singing and playing music at the Sydney Mind Body Spirit Festival, and I've been the MC on their stage for 30 years, doing 6 shows a year. But I'm not influenced. I'm not a New Ager. I'm not an Adventist.
Yeah.
I'm not a part of a lot of these things, but I kind of am. But again, I'm interested in common ground, and I find I've made some incredible, deeper friendships from this podcast, like yourself. Like, we ran into each other at Bunnings, and it was like,
Bunnings.
Hey, let's talk about this, and this camaraderie, the common ground.
It is common ground. And look, I've been pondering, what you're going to ask me and what I'm going to say, and I had a lot of discussions about it, trying to understand why I'd even be talking about this topic, because it's personal and it's been so long that it's not it's not something that anyone asks me about anymore. Like, my relatives have long ago assumed that I'm a lost cause, and no one sort of brings up the topic about, where I am and why. And I think that was part of the sense of loss when my mother died, because I've been trying to impress her all my life that I was a decent person.
Wow.
And one of the very last conversations I had with her, when she first told me she had cancer, I tried to ease the pain a bit by saying, look, I've been a good person. I've contributed to my community. I'm a good father. I'm a good husband. I've tried to live an ethical life. And if there is a heaven and there is a God, I think I'll be there. And she said, no, you're not coming.
Really?
You're not coming? No, because I don't have the belief. You got to have the belief to be eligible for the kingdom. And I was shattered by that, because I sort of, when she died, I sort of felt like I've spent 4 decades trying to impress her that I'm a decent person without having to be a Christian or an Adventist, that I'm a decent person at core. And it was something that she couldn't ever quite, accept. And I did read a thing some time ago that said there are 4 stages of spirituality. At stage 1, you're getting drunk every weekend, wasting your money and wasting your health, and not sure where you are and what you're doing. And then you go past an Adventist church, and an Adventist church says, here's some rigors, here's some rules that you can live by that will save you, son. And you do. You settle down, you stop drinking, you get married, you give away all the bad habits, and those rules save you. Your children then grow up and say, look, we were never tempted by those things. We grew up in a stable household, and we don't need to keep all those rules to feel good about ourselves. So that's like the 3rd stage. And the 4th stage is where you become a monk and once again live by a very strict, regulated life. So I always sort of thought, look, I understand Adventism's in the 2nd stage, where they live by the rules because they save them. But you can move past that. And, the gospel actually says you're justified by faith, not by works anyway. Yeah. So you can let the rules go from a biblical point of view without too much stress as well. And I've made my own rules, because there's things that I've done that I've sort of thought, I'm uncomfortable with that. I can't go there. It doesn't work for me. And there's other things that I do that people would sort of say, well, I can't do that either. And I'm saying, look, it's a personal journey that makes you discover where your limits are and what you're comfortable with and what you can do and what you can't do. And I'm comfortable that I live a fairly straight sort of a life, because that's who I am, and it's who I've discovered what my limits and what my capacities are. And I'm really grateful for that, because I think that's what life's all about, to explore your ability as a musician, your ability as a father and a husband, to explore what society's got to offer, and to give back to society like you're doing by doing this Q&A. I think that's a fabulous thing, Peter.
Yeah, finding who you are on your own terms is not a selfish thing, because you become an instrument that is more finely tuned, that can share with community and society on a more healthy grounding.
Yes.
And I just brought up there what Motor Sapien had said, what a devastating thing for your mum to say, what a horrible picture of God. And look, the sad thing within Adventism from an observer's perspective, even though a lot of these gospelers, these Adventist keepers of the gem of Adventism that's nestled in there, even though they've found a place there, immediately we then have to realise that people coming into the church, people born into the church, generally speaking, come into the kind of church that your mother was associated with, and is trumpeted and is supported by the very top. Ted Wilson is supported
by that. My
document, the whole idea. What they're about to give away 1 billion great controversies. No matter how good a gospeler you are, and you found your little gem within Adventism that you huddle around, and it's a great thing which I'm trying to expand. But no matter that, the reality is so many people coming into Adventism, growing into Adventism, they stumble across some of the incredible, really non-biblical gospel scenarios.
Peter, the really strange thing is my mother was an ardent Fordite. She followed Good News Unlimited. She donated money to them in her will. She understood the gospel, but somehow she couldn't stop her judgment.
That is incredible, isn't it?
She was very liberal in her theology, but I was just a bridge too far.
Amazing. Hey, tell us a bit about, see if you got some memories of recording All My Friends Are Sinners, and tell me how this book came about too.
Look, we we recorded All My Friends Are Sinners at a studio in Gosford. Paul Bryant was working. He was an ex-administ too. He's a couple of years behind me at Strathfield, and he became a studio engineer. So we knew him, and he organised time for us at a studio that was reasonable at Gosford. At the time, I was working at the medical centre at Dora Creek, and I was filling in for a dentist that had gone away for 12 months. So Bob and his family came up and stayed with us at Dora Creek, and we go down and record every day down at the studio near Gosford Station. And the musos came up, from Sydney. It was a very exciting time. So that was All My Friends Are Sinners was done, at Gosford. The book came about as a result of the Manifest concert. So one year, as I was saying, Bob won the Lifetime Award for contribution to the creative work that he had done, and so he hadn't been able to accept it, as I said, because there was a cyclone in Fiji. A year or two later, they said, "Look, could Galilee guys, could you put on a concert for us on the Saturday night?" Mm-hmm. So Lowell had been in contact with Sally. She knew she was living up at Tamworth. She was still singing from time to time, had her own band, so we got her band down, did some rehearsals, at a friend's place, at Peter Simmons' place at Martinsville. But before that, Lowell sort of said, "Look, we should write a book," because Lowell's a book writer, as you know. He's a published author, and he's had a career writing a lot of biographies for people. Mm. And so he got down and wrote most of the book. I added some chapters to it and my thoughts to it. Between us, we had a lot of we had songs, and we'd kept an archive of work that we'd done. So the book we produced it to go with the concert. So at the concert, we had if you remember, we had a table, and we had the CDs that we turned all the LPs into CDs at ARTP Studios with Dale Willis. Bob had found the original tape, the 8-track. It was an 8-track tape from memory that when we taped. So we had the original that we could remaster. Yeah. Which was we had to find a guy who had a machine that actually could run it, because he was so old. There's a guy up in the Blue Mountains eventually that I met that had a machine that actually did this. So they were remastered, and Dale did a great job in doing that. And then we wrote the book as well. So we had the original LPs to sell. We had the CDs that we'd done, and we'd had the book as well. So that was part of the creative process, and I think that it was possibly the last fling for Galilee. We'd only done two big concerts, and this was the second one. And it was for people who loved Bob and Lowell's work and had enjoyed the music. It was a possibly a once in a lifetime opportunity to have everyone in concert, including Sally and Bob as well. To have everybody there.
I'm pretty sure you videoed the night. Is that available at all? I'd love to.
Yes, it is. It is available.
I was there and absolutely loved it, but it was just such a blur of emotional that I have trouble bringing back the memories. I can see it all happening, and
yes. But I had my nephew on Anne's side, David Fleming, was a sound recordist with ARTP at the time, and he brought his gear down and videotaped it, and I've got on video. I've sent it to Bob, and I'm not sure if he's put it up on Facebook. But if you like, I can send you the link, because it's a gig or so, because it's over an hour. Yeah, it's over an hour, but I'll send it to you.
That's great. I was just looking at the intro to my book. Lowell's signed it for me.
He has.
Yeah.
He has, yeah.
It says February 2000 Oh, yeah, no, sorry, I misread that. Yeah, no, I thought it said 13. I thought it wasn't that long ago. It's actually, it must have given it to me February this year.
It was 14 that we did the concert, I think. It was,
Really?
it was 10 years ago. It's copyrighted 2014.
Can't
It was
believe it.
10
Oh,
years
it
ago, yeah.
feels like 5 at the most. Wow. Hey, look, we'll come back to this book. Are there any more memories that you've got here that you can just share with us that stand out? Any particular songs, experiences, memories, whether it's to do with writing the book or whatever? Just share with us 1 or 2 stories of Galilee, the label. I'm putting you on the spot a bit there, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love there's just pictures all the way through as well.
yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah.
highly recommend people go to the website. We'll put that in the links as well.
Look, I think that the friendship between myself and Bob and Lowell was that was that strong that we just loved working together.
Yeah,
And I think that shows in the music and the books that we produced, is that we end up just having fun. Long after we finished Galilee, we'd still get together all the time just to enjoy each other's company and to riff off each other and joke and
Yeah.
and compare notes and talk about stuff that was happening in our lives.
yeah,
And Bob and Lowell's collaboration is similar to to Paul and Paul McCartney and John Lennon, where the two
Yeah.
together produced amazing stuff, and so with Bob and Lowell, their
yeah,
collaboration produced amazing stuff. It's a very powerful creative collaboration, and it's been a privilege to be part of it and to observe how they operated and
yeah.
how they worked.
There's a chapter there on Anne. You mentioned Anne, your wife.
Yes.
We all had great respect for the creative spirit in each other, our partners, our families, and the Galilee family. And that's exactly what you were just saying. And then I just opened up to that.
Yeah.
There's a fun picture of you.
And when we were a lot younger.
We mentioned. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Look, I was going to say that as far as a confession of my spirituality and a confession of my faith is concerned, I've narrowed it down to really a very simple position, is that I find that some music touches me emotionally in a way which is deeply spiritual. Bob and Lowell's music does that to me. There are contemporary songs that do it to me. There's songs in every era that do it. And that's when I go into a meditative and a spiritual space. And it's not a belief structure, it's an emotional space which I enjoy and I love, and it's where I can reflect and I can feel everything in my life, and it doesn't take a church, it doesn't take a service, and it doesn't take even a discussion. It's an emotional space that I that I'm in, and it's sufficient for me. And I think that's what you need to find. You need to find a place that's sufficient for you, that your soul is satisfied, your soul is fed, and you're no longer thirsty.
Yeah, I love that. I can relate to that. Yeah. Hey, we mentioned Dale Willis, and he did such a good job on that project, pulling it together. And I wanted to raise Carl Needham as well. He did the artwork, didn't he, for All My Friends Are Sinners?
And he took this photograph.
He took that as well. I love that photo.
That photo, and he did the covers. He did the covers as well. He's Carl's an incredibly talented, graphic designer. Incredibly talented.
I remember a long time ago, but maybe I can't remember, late 90s or early 2000s. I had a go at trying to pull them out as a CD as well. I had the vinyls, and I remember getting into conversations with you, Bryant, Guy, Bob, Carl, and I immediately, and Lowell, even had some meetings with Lowell, but I did realize pretty soon that this was still a piece that had a lot of emotions and a lot of kind of things that were just sat a little bit out of a normal gravity. So there was just a little bit of non-focus, and I remember thinking this could end in tears. And so I kind of, we all just let it just slip away. So Dale Willis is a good friend of mine. So when I heard that he was involved of pulling it together again and following the journey, I was so pleased, thrilled to see it together.
Yeah.
Because I think there was a chance that this kind of era was going to be forgotten within the Adventist Church.
Yes.
And so I'm
Yeah.
so pleased that it has come together now in a really defined way. You know, people can read the book, they can buy the albums, and they can really gain a really wonderful insight, but experience it as well. So it's really exciting to see that that's come together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
all
it
of the
is.
people we've mentioned there have contributed to that. I'll bring up something Bob has written again here.
Yeah.
Again, I had no idea where the mouldy master tapes were after nearly 10 years of being in Fiji, until you came across from Sydney and said you weren't leaving until you had the tapes over a long weekend of turning my place. Where is it? Upside down without success. My dear wife, Lupe, remembered a box in our daughter's room, which she located, and voila, there was the tape.
Tapes.
You left the tapes, yeah. You left a happy man, and I was relieved and still am.
Yes.
And I remember that was the conversation you and I had. We were trying to find the master tapes, and
The
Peter
master tapes, yeah.
Paul Bryant, he had them on a DAT tape somewhere, but he
Yes.
wasn't willing to kind of release them until we had some kind of things sorted.
Yeah, everyone's very protective of their, creative space. The engineers reckoned it was theirs. Bob said it's mine. Obviously he's in charge. He's the one that needs to decide on what it's going to sound like and feel like. So there was Dale was the right person, because he was a musician and an engineer, but he wasn't going to dominate it. He wasn't going to own it, and so he was the right guy to do it.
And I think by then everyone had mellowed and realised that unless they collaborated, unless they put some of their kind of strong thoughts in the background, this would be forgotten. This would not happen.
Yeah.
And I love that Bob saying he went and said, "I'm not leaving until you." Hey, it looks like Dale is watching. I think he's.
Dale Willis, yeah.
No, maybe he's not. Maybe this is a mention from Bob. I'll just check. What a great muso and brilliant producer. Yeah, this is Bob mentioning Dale. If I was in my teens again, he'd be the bloke I'd love to work with in any studio, and that's so true.
Yeah.
Very talented musician and producer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also a lot of I'm often think about the creators in the Adventist Church, how they just, the word is flourish. They're never truly encouraged to flourish. Any Adventist artist or creative that flourishes is a rare being.
Peter, I after we finished Manifest, after we finished those two concerts, I was gobsmacked that there were a couple of hundred people in the Adventist Church who were creatives, who wrote poetry and painted and wrote music, and some wrote plays. There's a creative group there, and I was devastated on how poorly they were accepted by the church, and how they'd been hammered to stop all that because it was wrong. Somehow it was wrong, and I felt very. I wanted to be supportive. That's why, as MC of that concert, I spoke a lot about how important creatives were to the spiritual, to the whole spiritual life, because without it, you're left with just, you just left with dry crusts. There's no water. There's no fluidity. There's no love. There's no love.
Yeah.
There's no life in it. And I think it confirmed my gut instincts as a teenager and a 20-year-old when I left the church, that it wasn't just I was never going to be accepted for the creative, small amount of creative spirit that I had. And I felt very sorry for the people that were still utterly dedicated to the Adventist Church, wanted to contribute, but apart from playing, piano at a church service, everything else was not. It was never going to be accepted. And I don't know if it's changed very much. I know that I'm talking about events that occurred 25 years ago now, but after Anne and I stopped going to church, we were never visited by any minister. No one came and said, hey, why aren't you coming to church? We'd backslided. And eventually, when we were living in Avoca, a ministerial student came to see us. We said, at last, someone's interested. And he said, no, I've got to fulfill my requirements for my degree. I've got to go and visit 2 ex-Adventists. And I said, what? And Ed said, this is outrageous. You know, you're not interested in us. You're just coming for to fulfil your CPD points.
Yeah.
And he said, so what do you do? And Ed said, well, I'm very interested in art. He said, oh, good. We've been taught everything about art. And Ed said, great. What have you been taught? And he said, we've been taught that it's all wrong.
Oh yeah. Oh my
And
God.
I thought, that's about as far as it gets. You know, there's something wrong with modern art. There's something wrong with you expressing yourself, because only God's allowed to be creative. So you're not allowed to be creative.
Yeah.
God does the creative bit. You know, so you want to create art, you want to create music, you want to do something unique. You know, you're stepping on God's toes.
It's really
somehow.
sad. And I'm constantly being told by Adventists that say, no, look at this, we're doing this creative thing. But I keep seeing it in waves. There's a little period of time for a certain age Adventist that there'll be a real apparent flourishing, but it's never continued through a long period of time.
No.
I mean, I was very. Jim Zeideveld was there. We sometimes talk about this. I think it was 80 or 81. Was when I remember first being told I was a tool of Satan.
A tool of Satan.
Yeah, because I was playing music.
You're playing devil's music.
Devil's music.
Devil's music.
And this is interesting. Until I left, and I still get called similar versions of that.
Yeah.
Perhaps more so now. But as a creative, here's the sad thing: that would happen almost at every gig. Someone would have some kind of reference to it being wrong. There'd be some discussion at the billet where it's been billeted, or at the Sabbath lunch, or after the concert. But
can you tone it down a bit?
Yeah, tone it down.
Can you tone it down? Tone it down a bit. Yeah, you know, I don't really mind what you're doing, but can you tone it down?
Yeah, and this is the sad part: is that I and many creatives took that. That's just normal.
Yeah,
it's normal. And since leaving the church and being involved with music, like, yes, you have competition, and it's a real hard slog, and it's the real world. Boy, you're going to get knocked on the head if you're not doing something right, or if people don't like you, they'll be very honest about it. But when you find your place, the people are really encouraging.
Yeah.
And creatives are all encouraged. There's in the Adventist church, like I was very lucky to find a wonderful bunch of people that enjoyed my music and supported it, etc.
Yeah.
So it's definitely there, but I'm talking systemically. It's just
systemically, yeah. There's no part in the division that says that there's no minister that says, what are we doing with our creatives to further the gospel? You know, where are the guys that are writing the plays, that are writing, you know, scripts for movie series? Where are the guys that are doing the artwork, you know, that are cutting edge? Because those people are all available in the church.
Yes.
We would have been, a firebrand example, you know, and early adopters, and, you know, we broke the gates down. But, you know, there's people like you that have followed and that have continued to follow, that have sort of said, you know, where can our place be? And they've asked the legitimate question because they want to belong to the organisation which they love.
Yeah.
You know, I feel I've lost, you know, the church might have lost me, but I lost a lot more because I grew up believing that I'd be an Adventist all my life and I'd play a significant part in making this world a better place. And I've that opportunity, you know, it's been denied me. It hasn't eventuated because the church doesn't allow for that. They've got their own program, and whatever it is that you want is not what they want.
Yeah,
it's not what they want. And the powers that be know that they're appealing to a very conservative group of people, and they're staying, and that's their market, that's their base market, and that's their. And so, you know, people like you and I are not considered the base material, so we can be shunted aside or abused or, you know, marked down, you know, because we're not the target market. We're not the target market anyway.
Yeah, no, they've always followed the money, and the money has always gone to a more conservative audience.
and also it's gone to immigrants because, you know, churches are a great way of assimilating into society. So and bettering yourself financially as well. So it originally appealed to, you know, to the farming communities in America and Australia because the kids wanted to get off the farm and not be farmers. They go to Avondale and become ministers and coal porters and so forth. It appeals to immigrants because it enables them to assimilate in society. It appeals to people who having a lot of trouble dealing with their life and are falling apart because it gives them rigidity and a strict guidelines to live by. But if you're not part of that group, like I'm no longer an immigrant, I'm a child of immigrants, I'm not financially, stressed, and I don't need to assimilate into society. What do I do with Adventism?
Yeah.
What do I do with all those rules? Because I can make them up myself and manage myself. Thank you very much. I don't need somebody else to externalize all that. I can internalize it. And that's part of, I think, of spiritual growth and spiritual maturity, is that you internalize the rules and say, this doesn't, I'm keeping them because it doesn't work for me, rather than because I'm frightened of going to hell or being punished by God or whatever. I'm doing them because this is what works for me. I enjoy being a decent person. That's enough for me.
Yeah, I love that. We'll wrap it up soon, and we've had some fantastic topics that we've covered today. I do encourage people to go. We'll put the website in the link to go and buy the books. Contact the website there. Download the book, the albums, etc. I highly recommend people do that if they've got an interest in this kind of Adventism that we're talking about. In the 70s, Pastor Johansson was involved a lot at that. I've just got a mental blank of the church there, and I know that he really saw this notion of using music with the street preaching and in the gospel. I know Bob Wolfgram was involved a lot with that. Did you ever meet him?
I did, and I thought that he was a fantastic mentor to that group. It wasn't his group as such, although they did respect him a lot, and he presented a lot of spiritual ideas which were cutting edge and were exciting. But all the people involved had their own strong belief systems. It was a lot stronger theologically and spiritually than the Sydney one. And I think Bob's music formed a large part of it, and they supported Bob financially. As I said before, they donated money to all three albums because they believed in it so much, and it was possibly why I contributed, because I wanted to be part of the opportunity to bring about change in the church that I'd grown up in and that I loved as well. And I was disappointed that it didn't land, but at the same time, it was part of my journey, and it enabled a friendship with Bob and Lowell, which has affected and changed my life, and enabled me to see myself clearer, and to see the world in a clearer place. They're both of them are very emotionally mature, and they're great company. They're great company, and their music and their words reflect that.
And I think because of the freshness of it and the professionalism that you helped to infuse in it, and that Bob and Lowell and Sally and all the others put into it, it has this, you mentioned there that it didn't land. It keeps landing. Here we are all these years later, and it's just as fresh, having a wonderful impact on people as ever. So it's kind of an ongoing contribution that you guys have made to the Christian music scene, to the good news scene, to people that want to just feel good about themselves, whether they're atheists, agnostics, whatever. There's a really nice bit of music there and message that's all about hope and promise and warm feelings and looking at the teachings of Jesus in a practical way. Yeah. So I think what you guys have pulled together is a gem that is just going to keep on shining. I don't think people can ever relegate it to the basket heap of history.
I guess that I'm talking about in a commercial sense, landed in a sense that I really thought that we would, Bob and Lowell would end up being, famous and make it big in the music industry. And it's possibly a little bit early, because a few years later, places like Hillsong and came along, and then the core of what they were doing was music. There was bands, and rock wasn't a problem, and they attracted all the kids, and we were a bit ahead of our time and in the wrong church, but we had that. We were on the money. We were on the money, and it was a pity that we didn't become hugely financially successful. But that's the music industry, and I think people. We actually were interviewed once by Triple J. I took the album in and were interviewed by one of the disc jockeys there, and he sort of looked at the music and he said, "Yeah, it's really nice, but why are you bothering with Christian music? You can make it in the secular world, you know." And that wasn't where Bob and Lowell's heart was, unfortunately. But I always thought that it was sufficient quality to match it with anyone out there.
And look, at that time period, if the ducks were in alignment or the ducks were in a row, I think it could have really taken off. In the States, I mean, the Christian music, contemporary music scene with Amy Grant and all these guys were just taking off. Larry
just taking off, yes.
But yeah, there's timing, isn't there, where it's not about the talent or the content, just getting that right moment and the right kind of distributor in the States and the right tourist support for Michael W. Smith or whatever. They're the sliding doors that kind of can ponder for a long time. And I think too, to me, Bob's singing, I love Bob's singing. Like I think, and I think what was the title of this? That was originally just called Bob, wasn't it?
It was originally called Bob, and when we remastered it, he changed it to Refugee, which he thought was more appropriate. You know, it was a bit egocentric just to call it Bob.
And I think that was the second album, wasn't it?
It was the second album, yes. It was the second album. And I think it was because the street preachers that were supporting him said, look, you know, Sally's fine, but we want your voice, we want your album, we want you on it. And so he called it Bob because that was what they were asking for. But Refugee with and he's got his name, you know, Bob Wolfgram on the bottom, is possibly a more balanced approach.
Yeah, I think it purely from a branding perspective, going with Bob Wolfgram as the brand may have also had a more solid penetration into the US market. Or pick Sally Hilda, like pick the brand.
Pick the brand,
Make all three albums Sally Hilda. I mean, these are just little conversations you have thinking retrospectively.
In retrospect, yeah.
But as far as an impact goes, I think it's incredible and will be long, long lasting. Well, after we're all gone, people will be listening to these albums.
That'd be lovely. That would be really nice. That'd be really nice. They, you know, they still affect me. They still affect me. And, you know, there's a piano piece that Ag, Bob's first wife, plays on one of the albums, Come Just As You Are. And it's played in an Adventist way. You know, we've got a heritage, we've got a background, we've got a history, we've got a culture. It's just a pity that, you know, we couldn't flourish in it.
Imagine
if that's the sadness.
Imagine if the Adventist Church had run with all the different types of creatives that have come from Adventism and recognized talent when they saw it, regardless of what the genre is. Imagine, like, you know, some of these big record labels within the Adventist Church that only promoted heritage singers kind of thing. And imagine if they'd gotten behind this kind of product. I mean, I say product from the business side, but just imagine what a rich tapestry the Adventist Church would have and changed. Motor Sapien has just said, the album's only available on Spotify. No, I think you can still buy the actual CDs.
Yes, you can. You can on the Galilee website.
I think you can maybe. I know I've bought them in the past on iTunes. I don't know if they're still available on iTunes and Spotify. So Motor Sapien, go. What is the website?
It's just Galilee. Galilee.com.au, I think, from memory. www.
So just Galilee.com.au or .com?
.com.au from memory. The website was operating last time I looked at it.
So we'll definitely get that up there. So have you got any final words just to share with people? You know, again, we're trying to kind of you know, find this little gem of Adventism, which I think you saw, you helped to engage with, you helped to bring it out into a greater, to expose it to a greater audience. Any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
Look, I probably want to thank you, Peter. You grew up with the music when it was just on the edge of your um, the edge of your knowledge. You know, you're at an age where you heard it but didn't know who we were and where we were.
Mm.
And you know, from the first time I met you, which was about 25 years ago, you said, "Where are you guys? Where did you go? What happened?"
That's
And
right.
you're still asking that question. And I think that's, you know, I think it's lovely that you're honouring us that way, and I want to honour you back for doing that.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I definitely was wondering where everyone had gone because
Yeah,
I felt like if you know, I had an initial reaction, not by the time I chatted to you, but initially I felt what's the right word for it? Not let down. I just felt like, oh, if you guys had stayed, everything would have been all right, you know.
right.
But then I realized that's not true. But people have said that about me. They've said, "Oh,
Yeah.
you betrayed us." And I thought, well, man, I
Uh-huh.
gave you 40, 50 years of my
Yes.
life, you know.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I didn't betray you. I was being honorable to my young daughters. So thank you for saying that. I appreciate that because I think part of this SDA Q&A platform is we are getting to all hang out a bit, and even people have left. We're still
Yeah.
getting to
Yeah.
converse together. There's
Yeah.
a community within that has everyone from conservatives to liberals to formers and current Adventists. As I said, we are now actually all keeping in touch in an indirect way, which
Yeah.
feels
Yeah.
really good. Feels good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Feels healthy. It feels edifying, inspiring. Yeah.
And it's provides a historical balance to details that if
Yeah.
you hadn't asked the questions wouldn't be recorded and
Yeah.
wouldn't be out there.
Yeah.
And I think that's important too. I think you know, archives and history are important for people to understand where we came from and why and how.
100%.
Yeah, it's
What
important.
what started my thinking was reading in the early 90s guitar player magazines, and every issue would talk about Jimi Hendrix, Bob Dylan, every issue. They would hark back to the past. They
To
kept
the
it
past.
alive.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, boy, as an Adventist, I literally remember in the late 90s saying to someone, oh, I love, you know, All My Friends Are Sinners, that Sally Hilda, Bob Wolfgram, and they were like, who? And I thought, what? This is not far on from when it was released.
Yeah.
You have no sense. And that sparked my interest in going, I want to keep the past alive,
Yeah.
encourage those that are here now to create a platform for future creatives, and
Yes.
that didn't eventuate. But my first, I started a little magazine in the 90s sometime, I think from memory, called Tempo. I can't remember.
Tempo. Yeah.
And I had advertising, letters to the editor, and I'm pretty sure Bob might refresh my memory on this. I did an interview with him. I'll have a look for the article, the magazine.
Yeah.
But I remember that dream of, you know, and it didn't fully start until SDA Q&A,
Yeah.
where I got to kind of realize it with the social media as it is now. You can kind of do these things. Back then, though, it cost like $500 every issue to send out and mail out to people.
Yeah.
It was a lot of work to print it and everything.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for that. And I think we're kind of achieving some sort of common ground and camaraderie through this dialogue.
And I want to thank you because this is a difficult place to go, as you said. You know, as creative people, one of the difficulties is that your emotions are very deep, and my emotions are deep, and they're close to the surface, and it's difficult to go back into these spaces which can be painful. And I thank you for approaching it with great diplomacy and delicacy, because it otherwise could be a very difficult conversation to have. And I think you've managed to draw me out in ways that I feel very comfortable with. But otherwise, I was unsure on how I'd manage this particular part of the journey, because I haven't been asked these questions. You know, I think about it myself, and you know, it's been you know, I've been on my own here for a long time.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of people have said that they've found chatting about this kind of stuff on the show quite cathartic, and that they've had these emotions kind of brewing, and I'm hoping that we can kind of normalize it and make it more conversational and think of the pleasant things as well as the stuff that we think are issues.
Sure.
Someone has just shared
Galilee.com.au, yeah, Galilee Records, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So at least we've got that up on the screen.
Yeah.
Mate, it's been such a good conversation. I look forward to running into you again at Bunnings. And for those, do you know our biggest audience is in America? Like we've got way more people than Australia, even though the Australian audience is big.
Yeah.
And New Zealand and
good on you.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Yeah. People won't know what Bunnings is, but what's the equivalent?
It's called Home Depot.
Home Depot. Okay.
Home Depot in the States. Yeah.
So we'll look forward to catching up again, and maybe we can have a coffee sometime soon. And
that'd be lovely. I do come up to Cooranbong and Morisset, reasonably often. I won't wait to bump into you. Let's connect and have a coffee and catch up.
Let's do it. I'm free most Mondays. Let's do it.
Most Mondays. Okay, I'll give you a call. Thanks, Peter. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. And I've got a mental blank who's on next week. The lady that was an Adventist and became a Catholic. Mental blank. Anyway, I'm pretty sure she is on. Catch you guys. See you later.
Bye-bye.